Pasar saham Indonesia masih terus bergerak mengikuti sentimen pasar global yang tidak menentu. Tapi ada beberapa perubahan struktural yang terjadi di dalam negeri, seperti perubahan dalam sistem anggaran dan pasar bersama ASEAN. Berikut analisis IHSG dari Bharat Joshi, Head of Investment Aberdeen Asset Management.
The thing is, when we looked at 2015, there were so many issues which were very challenging. You had a very weak consumer sentiment, so Indonesians are not consuming as they used to. You had a decline, a depreciation of rupiah. You had a government which were relatively very new in office, and everybody were learning. But now you move 1 year ahead. Now we are sitting here in January 2016. You have the rupiah which has stabilized. You have consumer sentiment which have turned positive in the last year, fourth quarter. And you have a government which for the first time is already serious about working and executing. So to look at what the year will be, I'm actually very excited. I think we will definitely see a lot of the fruits that the government has put in from the various stimulus packages, the 8 stimulus packages, being now implemented. So last year, one of the biggest challenges we saw in 2015 was we had 6 months where they had to revise the budget and no projects were being tendered out. Then we had the Lebaran, and then only projects were being executed in August and September. And then cement sales, infrastructure, toll roads completion only started taking off. This year, on the other hand, 2016, we already saw the signing of the high-speed rail from Jakarta to Bandung. Usually a project like this will only happen in the second half, but now this has been fast-tracked. And then what we will see is a lot more projects which will be tendered out in the coming months. Why is this taking place? Is because the 2016 budget for Indonesia was approved in 2015. In the past, Indonesia's budget will always be approved in the year itself, which was very astonishing because they only get approved in March. But you had 3 months of no growth. That's why cement sales have always been very weak in the first quarter, because there's no projects to go out. So this year should be a turning point for the country. So the sectors that will look very interesting for this year would be the banks, because now we have seen the reduction of the interest rates. The other exciting sector will be the telco sector, because you will see data volumes actually start increasing and data prices have started to rise. The other sector, given the infrastructure theme, you will see is the cement sector will be quite positive. And then the last but not least will be the consumer sector. And the consumer sector, why it would actually be positive, it's because you will see a decline in distribution costs. So when you see decline in distribution costs because of fuel prices, I think the biggest, from the opening of the AEC, the Asian Economic Corridor, the biggest beneficiary would be the manufacturing sector and your consumer companies. And the likes of consumer companies will be like Kalbe Pharma, because they will start to regionalize their operations. I'm sure there will be a lot more companies, consumer companies, which will start moving offshore, because these companies will have to start thinking that their customer base is no longer 250 million in Indonesia population, but close to 1 billion if you include the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Myanmar, Indochina. So this is a very big market. With the market, it's very difficult to tell because it's all depends on external movement. You see China slowing down, Japan has strengthening of currencies. The world outside of Indonesia, it still hasn't really fully recovered. But if you look in the context of Indonesia, the fundamentals are still very strong. And if we assume that last year it was a very weak number in terms of GDP, this year we'll see a much stronger GDP number because there's a lot more infrastructure spending that's being taken place. And the other thing that's also important to note is the borrowing cost has actually fallen. So it's now cheaper to take money from the bank to spend in terms of capex. So companies which last year have stalled capex investments, this year they will restart the engine for capex growth. And they are not leveraged. Corporates Indonesia, unlike the crisis in the 90s, where there were a lot of them were leveraged balance sheets, now is no longer the case. So there is a lot of room for them to leverage their balance sheet for growth. So with that in mind, the Indonesian index should definitely be much better than what it was last year. How I look at it, if you look at GDP growth at about 5.5%, and you add that times 1.5, which typically what companies generally grow their earnings, you're looking at a high single digit, 9 to 10% growth.